You are listening to the audio portion of the QB Power Hour webinar series. The QB Power Hour is a free biweekly webinar series for accounting professionals presented by Michelle Long and Dan DeLong, who are very passionate about the industry, QuickBooks, and apps that integrate with QuickBooks. You can find out all the details about the webinar series at qbpowerhour.com. So without further ado, here's Michelle and Dan.
Welcome everybody to another QB Power Hour. Today we're going to be talking about managing your Intuit login. We're going to really take a deep dive into the whole idea about the Intuit login account, managing users, all of those shenanigans, so to speak. As the case may be, the subtitle is the bane of navigating your Intuit services. It was when I worked at Intuit, it was a common call that had to do something about the login experience. And so I want to unpack that today. But welcoming back Michelle to the show. Appreciate you joining us here again. We missed you.
Hey, Dan, it's good to be back. I am happy to be back from down under. I got to go down to Australia and got to finally do my snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef and got to visit my daughter in Papua New Guinea. And I'm very happy to say I did not break anything this year. So I'm very happy about that. But it's good to be back. I'm glad to see you again, along with Matt and see everybody. So good to be back.
Likewise. We love having you. Hearing your thoughts on this topic as well. My name is Dan DeLong, owner of Danwith and School of Bookkeeping. Worked at Intuit nearly 18 years, co-hosting today, as well as the Workshop Wednesday over at School of Bookkeeping as well. And joining us again is Matthew and maybe Linda, or maybe we can coax her into getting a 2-for-1 down in Florida. But Matthew, go ahead and introduce yourself for those that don't know.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Matthew Fulton. I'm the founder of QB Community Live Facebook group. I am down visiting my good friend Linda here in Estero, Florida, after just going to the Refame conference and have a really horrible task of staying out by the Gulf until we fly out to Intuit Connect this weekend. So love being here with everybody. Hello, everybody, and thanks for allowing me to be on. And Michelle, I'm glad you didn't break anything.
The struggle's real, Matthew. I appreciate you taking time out of your tough and donning the fedora. And it looked good on you.
Thank you.
So a little bit about the QB Power Hour. It's every other Tuesday. We are eligible for CPA credit for the first webinar of the month. If you're keeping score at home, this is the second. So this one is not eligible for CPE. So if you came here for the CPE, sorry, it's not available on this one. And now we see everybody leaving. No, I'm kidding. And joining us here today. If you need the resources, the PDFs of the slides, we're posting those in the chat, as well as where we're live streaming as well. Or you can always go to qbpowerhour.com/resources for the podcast, recordings, and as well as other resources. But anything that we're talking about here today, just some housekeeping. If you have specific questions about the topics that we're talking about here today, please put them in the Q&A because it makes it a lot easier for us to manage those questions as they're coming in on the live webinar. If you have general things to talk about that doesn't relate, like to Michelle, I was snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef or things like that, you can use the comments or the chat, as well as we have the links in the handouts there to download those. We, of course, have the QB Power Hour store. You can check those out if you want. Again, no CPE today. It is only the first webinar of the month until we can twist our friends at Maker's Hub's arm to fully sponsor and cover all of our CPE credit. But today, there's no CPE credit. All right. Our agenda today, we're going to talk about the anatomy of an Intuit login. There's terms that are utilized where we talk about account versus account. And we're going to unpack what that means in relationship to an Intuit login. We'll talk about the parts of that login. And then we'll talk about this concept over at Intuit of personas. So that's the pronunciation, not personas or personas. And then we'll talk about some useful sites for managing your login. And then we'll break in when logins, right? Like the advanced stuff of primary admin, email change requests. We'll talk about a +1 email, not an email hack in that your email is getting hacked, but that there is a workaround or a way to be able to utilize Gmail or webmails a little bit differently than maybe you might know. And so we're to share that with you as well as the Chrome profile. So let's start off with our first polling question of how many Intuit logins do you actually have?
Oh boy.
I can't imagine, Matthew, you have only one. Mine is terrible. I know exactly where my logins are situated, like a messy desk. But if somebody came in and tried to clean it up for me, I would be, I think I'd be lost at that point. What do you think, Matthew?
So I definitely have too many to count, but I have another question onto this. The other thing I have is, do you know how many different accounting firms I've been added onto as an employee to be able to help? It's one of the best ways where for our community and our friends, where they need assistance with a question, long term, they leave me on there and they assign me to just certain clients to where I can just help out at times. So too many to count for sure.
Yeah, you're in that too many account. It looks like about 13% of the people who have responded so far in that too many account /error. Michelle, how about you? You probably have a few Intuit logins floating out there.
Yeah, same situation as Matthew. Plus, we would also set some up for training purposes. And then we would have those that we would also have to deal with. And in addition to our real ones for client purposes. So, yeah, trying to keep it all straight is a nightmare. And then you get an email about your service is going to be discontinued on this one or something. You're like, which one? And sometimes Intuit doesn't provide you those details. So then you're going crazy trying to figure out what that email pertains to. And so it's a nightmare.
Yeah. And not to take us off topic, but Matthew, if you want to talk a little bit about, speaking of Intuit communication, the bad situation about the recent emails that went out. I know there's a lot of posts about that on our Facebook group and yours as well. But you want to talk just briefly before we get derailed?
Yeah. Super brief version is apparently they're real. In traditional fashion, we were very well educated ahead of time to help us educate our communities and make sure we didn't think it was spam, because I thought it was spam at first. They are real. Credly is going to be the new person that's doing the new badges, is what I've last heard from it. So they are real, but still be careful because there are spammers out there and hackers that will always try to take advantage of something we're not comfortable with yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. So always being very cautious. And I think that speaks to the being the trusted advisor in the relationship. Accountants and bookkeepers, they are the gateway to a lot of sensitive information, and having your login compromised is certainly something that you certainly don't want to find yourself in that situation, because then you could be on the other side of this whole embezzlement. It's a challenge when somebody else is doing that on your behalf. Definitely be a good idea to always be cautious and trust but verify. And I think it's the best way to appreciate Matthew for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about Intuit products and services that require a login. So this is probably not an exhaustive list, but this is a list of things that require an Intuit login, right? So you look at the QuickBooks side of things, you look at the personal, because Intuit is not just QuickBooks, Credit Karma, the TurboTax, QuickBooks Self-Employed, and then you have the professional tax side of things where you have the Third and Pro Series and Pro Connect, as well as the QBOA, the online accountant. Could span both sides of those things. So basically, and Intuit started a initiative back when I worked there about this whole idea of a one Intuit identity. They abbreviated it OI, right? Probably because that's the expletive that you say when you have to manage all of these logins. But in theory, you only need one Intuit login to log in to any or all of these services, right? The challenge is this. There were logins that were acquired, right? So what I did was I highlighted or
You grade out the others, right?
grayed out. Thank you. Yeah. I grayed out the non-Intuit created login, right? So looking at all of these banks, they acquired MailChimp. That already had a login system in place. They acquired Credit Karma. That already had a login in place. Mint came and went, right? And that had its own login platform. I put asterisks by the ones that have long been since acquired. Intuit Online Payroll, the online backup service, QuickBooks Time, T-Sheet, like all of these had their own login. So in order for Intuit to have this whole idea of one Intuit login to rule them all, Sauron's ring of login, those logins already existed. And then there's this whole idea of migrating your login, which if anybody remembers the Intuit Online Payroll debacle of trying to get a one login system to move over into the Intuit login system, that was quite an experience to behold, right? So you have essentially two logins trying to join into one. In the grand scheme of things, you could have a login that matches the same Intuit login, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is the login that is the Intuit login, right? Matthew, Michelle, any thoughts on this whole concept?
So I feel like anytime there are these major changes, right, is there make these acquisitions of these different softwares, there's a lot involved to bring them into the right channels and blah, blah, tech talk and like coding and everything else. But once it starts working, it really is pretty dang cool and it does work well. It was very frustrating at first. At least they're taking their time and they're doing one at a time instead of imagining, like, hey, we just bought all these things and now it's going to be all. Maybe they need to acquire a password manager next and help us with that part.
Right. That's probably the easiest thing. Michelle?
Yeah. I'm going to confess I was talking badges in the chat. So, but I agree with Matt there. When you do the acquisition, it is confusing at first. But I think having one ultimate one that works for all of them is the ultimate goal. But
yeah. And then we have things like what we were talking about where you have a testing login or a training login or things like that, that could certainly, spread things out. We're having multiple logins, right? So hopefully we will uncover some of those aha moments throughout this webinar. But then there's logins that might not use an Intuit login, right? So desktop company files, right? So when you create an admin user or file specific user inside of desktop, those user logins are not the same as your Intuit login. Now, in the past few years, they've been asking you to assign a Intuit login to that user inside of the desktop file to further confuse. Now, they're not doing it on purpose, but the whole idea is it's a protection, right? It's a security measure, because if somebody does abscond with your QuickBooks desktop file and they have the admin password, they'll be able to get into the file, right? So if they want to change that admin password, they need an extra level of security in order to reset that admin password by sending it to the Intuit login contact information for the user or the person who's associated with that admin user. So it's a good reason, but it just adds this gray area of the login. ProAdvisor certification, which is everybody's talking about the badges in the chat. ProAdvisor is one of those things that is only assigned to an identity, right? Like a person, but it's not necessarily a service in the grand scheme of things of like a MailChimp or QuickBooks Online or things like that. That's an individual when it comes to being a login. And then this article that I was looking at, which we'll link to post to show, was talking about QuickBooks desktop online backup, but not Intuit Data Protect, which I think there was, and as I was like really logging my memory, I think there was 2 online backup services, and then Intuit Data Protect just won out in that process. So I think what they're referring to there is the desktop online backup prior to 2018, when Intuit Data Protect was not the only backup service in town for desktop. But just adds to the level of confusion when we're talking about logins and services. So let's just talk about the anatomy. So we'll go into a little Intuit biology class here. The anatomy of an Intuit login. We'll talk about creating an Intuit login and the parts. And I think the biggest aha moment for me, as I was really learning about the nuts and bolts of an Intuit login, is the difference between a login name and an email address. Like the difference between a barcode and a UPC code, right? So some are universal and some are a little bit unique. So we're going to talk a little bit about those types of things as we dive into that. But first, how do you create a login, right? There's really 3 ways that a login is created. You create one immediately. You go to an Intuit site that says you got to log in, and so I create one. Or you're signing up for a service like QuickBooks or anything else that requires a login, and it asks you to enter or create your login. Or, and what causes most people's agita these days, is you're invited to a site or service, and then it ends up, this is where things can tend to compound, is when you're invited to a site or a service and there's a mismatch between the email that you're invited to and your login. We'll uncover that. Any thoughts so far? I'm just rambling here, Matthew and Michelle.
There's one area that I'm sure you're going to get to, but the key thing is when you're invited as an accountant into somebody else's thing, the super magic thing is make sure you log out of anything and everything Intuit related. I'm sure you get to that in just a bit here, but just if you do that, you will be able to accept it into the right firm, the right way, and make sure you have access the way you need it and get those fancy points that do so much for us, of course.
Exactly. And yeah, we will talk about that, but typically where I see most people get in trouble with these sort of things is when they're doing all this inviting on the same computer. And typically you want to have those things be separate, because then temporary internet files and cookies, and as they're delicious, you don't want to necessarily have those cross-contaminated between those two different logins. What you're doing, and you're able to manage some of the things, or hopefully give you some nuggets of information that might help with that. You can certainly do it on one computer. You need to know the problem, right?
So you're going to give us the gluten-free recipe of how to get this done?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
For all those gluten-free folks. So let's talk a little bit about the anatomy and the big aha between the login name and the email address. So the big thing to recall and remember here is that the login name is something that needs to be unique, right? And that typically an email address is unique to you, right? In theory, Michelle only has one email address that is tied to her, right? That's why you would send an email to Michelle and hopefully Michelle will get it, right? An email address is something that's already unique to a person. However, because of those prior login platforms potentially combining into one, you may have two different logins that are tied to the same email address as the login name, right? So then that's a no-no, right? You can't have two logins with the same login name. So you end up having multiple different login names potentially assigned to the same email address. Now, the login name can be the email address, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the email address. The only requirement is that the login name has to be unique, right? And that's really what it boils down to. And these are individually editable, right? So when you log into, and we'll provide some of these login sites to manage your login, at those sites, you can change these things all you want, right? As long as you can sign in to that site. You can manage the user ID, you can manage the email address, you can manage the password, and as well as the phone number that's attached to those MFA codes that you end up getting. So it's quite, as long as you're managing the login side of things and not, as we'll get to, the company admin or the company persona side of things, that's fine. That's totally fine. And they don't necessarily have to jive. But those are the key takeaways of your login in general. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, but again, I think you're going to run into this pretty soon here, is talking about Intuit camps, where all of this stuff comes to a head once you've created all of this.
And Jennifer asked in the Q&A, so login is interchangeable with the whole idea of a user ID. Yes. So that is exactly the case here. And that's part of the challenge is you go to different websites or different Intuit sites and they'll say email, user ID, phone number to sign in. And it could be any iteration of any three of those that uniquely identifies you. So if you have multiple email addresses or multiple logins tied to the same email address and you put in the email, then it's not going to know who you are until you actually sign in with that user ID. So I have multiple logins and they're tied to the same email address. And of course, my phone number or the MFA code is the same. So I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to put in an email address or a phone number because it could potentially be tied to the wrong part of me, the wrong login of which I'm trying to associate.
Yeah.
So you want to be specific and understand that the user ID is what makes that login unique. And then here is this whole concept of a persona. we'll talk specifically about QuickBooks Online because that's what we're wanting to focus on here today. But any Intuit site or service, product or service, is going to have a persona associated with it. And for QuickBooks Online, these are commonly a primary admin, right? So a primary admin is a common persona. Company admin is another one. The accountant user, right? So you alluded to the whole idea of getting invited as the accountant. And then there's other users. But basically, those personas are assigned on the company ID level, on the service level of things, not to the login. The login is attached to the persona, but not to the access right within that particular product or service.
Can I interrupt you real quick here on this part?
You can. Yes.
Okay. So primary admin is an accountant. We go and we're creating a brand new we're a new QuickBooks Online subscription for somebody. And we are the primary admin that set that up. It's on our billing. We do all that until we decide to transition and switch over the primary admin to the actual owner of the company, in which we can still be a company admin. Primary admin has the highest power capability. It's responsible for the billing, subscription, everything else. Company admin can still have access to everything, including adding accountants on, so forth. An accountant user, now, accountant user, you get your special accountant tools. That is, of course, truly the one we all always want. It's when you log into your firm, you can see all the different companies that you're working with, click the little button and get into all of those. You can be a company admin, not an accountant. And now when you have your login screen, it looks crazy weird like mine. And you've got all these different firms that you're attached to, right? And then lower, as a company admin, there's all these companies that are below there, but you don't have your accountant tools. Same thing as a primary admin, like you just have to be cautious how you do those parts. And then the other users, and you're not even going into the advanced aspect of this where they've added other things like bookkeeping and so forth. Right. So primary company accountant are the primaries we want to be really looking at in our roles. And your best place is to get yourself put into that accountant user. Even if you open the account form, get it switched out of that, make sure they have ownership of their own stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. These top three they're very gray, I guess is the best way to describe it. The primary admin is a company admin, right? But the company admin is not the primary admin. You can have multiple company admins, and then adding in the accountant user has company admin rights to the QuickBooks Online subscription with those added accountant tools functionalities, right? So there's a lot of crossover, I guess is the best way. A little bit of a Venn diagram. I think that's what we ultimately need. We need a Venn diagram of primary admin, company admin, accountant user, of where they all intersect, and then what's unique about each of those. But that's a good call out. So there's another number or unique identifier that we want to talk about. You're asked this all the time when you call or talk to Intuit, the company ID.
Control
right. Or control option for us Mac users out there. The company ID, and then again, to further confuse things, in the desktop world, they call them realm IDs as opposed to company IDs, but they're essentially the same thing. That company at Intuit is going to be associated with a company ID or a realm ID, and personas are associated at that company level, right? So those personas are then assigned to a login where you are when you sign into said service, but that's that middle layer of things. And when I worked there, again, they use the same term to talk about both the user ID as well as the company persona. They called it an auth ID. In in both instances to further keep us on our toes, because we would say, what's the auth ID? And they're actually talking about two different things.
So this also comes into play with, and I won't go deep into this, but it has to deal with the developer talk. When you're creating the credentials to connect a third-party application, that's where that auth ID stuff comes into play, because they have to recognize it's really difficult for every app to create that accountant view we all love and we should always have. You create the coding for people to have certain access levels, and then to put another layer on top where it's a firm, then you have different users, and then you still have sub capabilities below it. That auth ID is where the coding comes into play.
Good point. So let's talk about the primary admin. So depends on whose perspective you're talking about as to what the definition of the primary admin is. And I like to put things in most simplest terms. And the reality of a primary admin is they are the first person and the first login to touch the service. Much like this moon man laying claim on the Mars or moon or whatever it is, that's the first person to touch the service. From Intuit's perspective, the primary admin is the owner of that service, right? So they're the one that's going to be getting all of the subscription-based emails and those types of things when they log in. And because of this reality of the first person to touch the service is immediately the primary admin, that gets us all into these challenges with that this was delegated to an office manager or an employee to set up QuickBooks or set up service. God forbid it's the payments account, but they delegated them to do. But because they are the first person to touch that service, right? And we use an example of you as an accountant, you go into your QBOA and you create a QuickBooks online subscription for your client. As you correctly mentioned, Matthew, you are the primary admin and the accountant, right? So in that situation, you are both personas, and that's why you see yourself in the managed user page as well as the accountant firms. But because you were that first person to touch the service, you're the primary admin. Of course, you're going to be getting all of the notifications that come to the primary admin, whether it's about the subscription or adding users or deleting users or anything that is more of an admin thing. Michelle, you were raising your hand there.
I am. Because how do you stop that? Once you're not associated with the firm anymore, once you're not primary admin anymore, or whatever the case may be, once you get out of that role or away from a company, like how do you make it stop?
So I'm glad you asked the question. And I don't know if this is really the right answer, but this is something I was going to bring up. With my company, Parkway Business Solutions, I used to have a business partner. And one of the things I learned somewhat the hard way is I strongly recommend, and I'm speaking now from the QuickBooks Online accountant perspective, but it really works the same kind of a concept for a company, is you should have the primary admin of your QBOA accountant version, a general email that's above even the managing partners. So that way, if a managing partner leaves the business, you can remove them easily and still have control correctly of all the clients and things that need to be done. It was such a brutal nightmare trying to transition over clients that have been created by somebody else's as the primary admin under the same firm. So when I kept the company, I had to reach out to Intuit. It became this huge, massive thing, including like merchant processing. A year and a half, 2 years later, was still under somebody else's email that I ended up having to shut down my whole merchant processing, set up a whole new one, all these different things within my own firm. So I don't want to take us too far off the topic, this is
Oh, that's a good point.
Like,
That's definitely relevant.
and that's great advice moving forward. But what about for a situation now where, let's say I'm an accountant and I've got former clients that I no longer work with. So the client has gone out of business, the client went to another accountant, whatever the situation may be, where I used to be the primary admin and now I'm not, and I'm still getting emails on him. And I don't have anybody else in my firm. It's just me. How do I stop email coming from former clients?
Yeah. The challenge is who the login is tied to and how cooperative that login is available, right? So if you're able to sign in with said login or have access to that, fantastic. You can do that. Ideally, you'd want to be doing it on 2 separate computers so you don't have the crisscross. You could be logged in simultaneously or different Chrome profiles or what have you. So there's all sorts of ways to manage that. The whole idea of the payroll emails of a client that is no longer your client.
Yeah, especially payroll.
It's a challenge, right? And what we're ultimately alluding to, it's real easy to set up these things. It's real difficult to change them once they're set up. But they are changeable as long as you're doing it in the right place. And it really just depends. And this example of you're creating a QBO subscription for your client, you become the primary admin of that QBO subscription. But if you're not the primary admin of the firm, that's where this whole concept of personas comes into play, right? You may have a company admin access to the firm, but not the primary admin access to the firm. But you create the QBO subscription, you are the primary admin. Your login is the primary admin of that subscription, which may or may not be what you wanted to have happen. But as long as you're aware that this is what's going to happen, it's a lot easier to manage these things. I think the more it's a G.I. Joe answer. It's half the battle, right? So there are a couple sites that are very useful to manage your login. They do things differently. One is the CAMPS site, CAMPS, and the other is the accounts site, accounts.intuit.com. They little foreshadowing, they made it plural, knowing that you were going to be having multiple accounts, not account.intuit.com. We're plural. They will do things differently at different sites, but the CAMPS site, talk about that, is where you would go to. First time that you go to camps.intuit.com, you're presented with this list of services to log into. Everything short of QuickBooks Desktop will just take you to that site or service that you happen to click on. So if I wanted to go to QuickBooks Online, which is redundant to have QuickBooks Online Accountant and QuickBooks Online side by side, because it's only going to take you to the same place. And then your experience is going to be different based off of what you choose next, whether I go into a QuickBooks Online company or if I go into a firm, if that login happens to be tied to. But what this tells me is that the login that I use to sign into CAMP is attached to the company, a company that has QuickBooks Online Accountant and QuickBooks Online as well, which in and of itself is the same thing. Is just what you're going to experience when you click on said icon here, right? And then you have payments and Intuit Online Payroll, but QuickBooks Desktop is where you're going to see this screen. And trying to blur out anything that's not identifiable, but the things that you can do in here is view your license, download software. You can view the transaction history. Keep in mind that this is only for this Intuit customer account number. This is not across the Intuit ecosystem. customer account number is the unique identifier at Intuit that represents that account, right? And this login that you happen to log into has access to that customer account number. And in the upper right there's a drop down where you could potentially see multiple clients and multiple Intuit accounts that login has access to, which you're going to have a different experience when you click on the different customer account. Matthew,
I got a question because in the drop down of mine,
you're having an aneurysm, I think.
I am. I'm hating this. This is really horrible. In the drop down to one company, somehow my name is Matthew Jane Fulton, and I've never been able to figure out how to get rid of the Jane, and it pops up all over the place. I've tried to remove myself from it. Like, I'm going to go on mute and cry.
What is so ironic about all of this, and this has been true, I think, for 20 years, that Intuit is a software company helping small businesses manage their accounts and their bookkeeping and all this. And they can't manage all this stuff very well either. It drives me crazy, the hypocrisy of it. I'm sorry.
No, that's certainly understandable. But
because it is confusing and it is a nightmare when you try to fix something, and it shouldn't be because they're a software company.
Sorry. Yeah. And in here, if you can, if I could scroll down, you would see that there's contact information listed there. If you change it there, that's fine. But all that's doing is changing the contact information for that customer account number at Intuit for that desktop software, right? So that's not universal that you're changing. If you change the login information, the contact information as the login information, that's going to be the login, or that's going to be the contact information that's associated with that login. That is unique from the company persona, right? So just keep that in mind that those two things are separate. So this is where people get into the aneurysm facepalm type of situation where they're changing the persona contact information instead of changing the login information, and those emails that are sent that pertain to the login is not updated because you're changing the persona side of things. And we have a new guest join.
She heard us talking about camping, and she was like, "This is ridiculous. I don't ever go camping." Right?
Which involves Appy Camp.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that registration made
Or
sense.
glamping.
All right, so we're gonna throw up the second poll question. What's your primary concern about regarding Intuit login? Now that you've just joined the webinar, Linda, what do you think about all this login shenanigan?
You talk about the one for like me?
No, I said, so for those who are watching live, I said, if you find camps to be confusing, put a 1 in the chat. And let's just say we had about 100 ones in the chat a moment ago.
I was wondering what that one was all about.
Oh, you mean Intuit's camp?
Yeah, what do you think about it?
I never really go in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the different login aspects and what can you do or not do with it as we're doing this.
I have an old legacy email with Intuit, and not one I really use, with bookkeeping in the name. And I am terrified to change it for lack of being able to access my clients. I'm told it can be done. Dan Luthi said it can be done. It's doable. Too scared.
Yeah.
More ones coming in.
And that big thing, because the ProAdvisor certification and the profile is one of those no man's lands that is neither tied to a login nor a service. It is tied to a login, right? So you sign in to your QBOA, you go to ProAdvisor certification, you're going to see the certification that login is tied to, but it's not a product or service that in the traditional sense of QuickBooks Online or payments or payroll or any other thing that is tied, that is potentially tied to, there's no realm ID, there's no company ID associated with your ProAdvisor. That is where it gets tricky, because you certainly don't want to play with your certifications and get all new badges, right?
Times 20.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to take that advanced certification again, right, Matthew?
Oh, I didn't. I like the worst thing I ever did was let that lapse. I had to redo it. But to get us back onto here, I remember when the multi-factor authentication came out, I hated it. Now I love it. I think it's super, super important. It's easy. They have made it easier via phone, all that kind of stuff. If you have, put a number 2 in the chat. If you don't have actually don't do that, because if you don't have multi-factor authentication set up, please do it right away, because as they're starting to streamline and standardize all this stuff, it's so necessary. It's a must, and it does make things so much easier.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to manage the login. It's just, I think what I've seen lately is when you're presented with, put your phone number in instead of the password, and then it just sends you in this loop of, okay, I get the MFA code, and then it's asking for the password. Why did you even ask me for my phone number if you're then going to ask me for my? So it's a different experience depending on which site that you're going to. Like, again, one of the challenges of being siloed into different business divisions over there. But it looks like account recovery is the biggest concern that people have. Password security is another thing, which leads to the whole multi-factor authentication. So let's go ahead.
Sherry had a quick question. She's got a client who has 8 different logins for the camps account. QBD Sports telling me there's no way to combine them into one login. Any suggestions?
Yeah, that's a great point. Think of a login like a social security number. You can't just merge social security number, right? So the thing is that you can transfer and you can invite those logins and then ultimately remove the logins once those logins have been consolidated. Yeah, there's no magic button to say, okay, all my 8 logins are all me. You have to go into each individual service. So in the camps situation, if they have 8 camps accounts, like different customer account numbers added to it, each one they'll have to log in, invite the login, accept it, and then go in and then remove the old one. Right. So it's once that union is made between the service and the login, it has to, in order to break it, you have to have somebody else involved, meaning you, another login associated with you, but keep the logins, because they are unique, they are separate, right? And they just need to be invited, and then you can move things around. We'll talk about that whole transfer of primary admin, changing email addresses. So this is when logins attack. We won't see login week on Discovery Channel, but we will see shenanigans that happen. Because first thing is the whole idea of this invitation, right? So when you're invited any service, we'll just use QuickBooks Online as the example. The persona email is sent, and you get these emails, and Intuit doesn't know who you are at that point, right? So they're, someone that has the ability to do that, primary admin, company admin, accountant user, goes in and invites a user and associates the roles and permission with that with that company user, and then Intuit sends an invitation email to that email that you enter. you don't type it in right, they're not going to get it. If it's filtered out, they're not going to get it, right? Intuit's very good about sending the email, doing what you're told, what is told. It just has to be told properly, right? Associating the right roles and permissions, entering in the email address spelled properly, and it's outside of their control if there is a spam filter, avoiding that. But any login that email is tied to is acceptable to accept that invitation. But keeping in mind that those logins are unique. If you have multiple logins tied to the same email address, any one of those is acceptable to use. But you need to make sure, and you want to make sure, that the login that you're using is the login that you're wanting to use, right? So this is where people get in trouble. Like, hey, I'm signed into my TurboTax on another tab, and then an email invitation comes in. I click on it. I meant to use another login, but because I'm already signed in to another site or service with another login, the breadcrumb trails, the temporary internet files, crisscross multiple logins, it just assumes you were logged in already to an Intuit login. I'll just use this login. And now that union is made between the company user and the login user. And now in order to break that, you have to start over, deleting and reinviting.
So the anchor statement of this is what I mentioned earlier. Anytime you're going to accept an invitation to anything Intuit related, log out of anything Intuit related on the computer, all browsers, everything else, fully logged out. Once you've done that, then click the link through the email and you will be more successful. You'll then have the choice to choose which firm to add it to. And I'm saying it that way on purpose as an accountant who's been added to many different firms. You get to choose which one you want to add it to, goes to the right place. There's no crisscross, double cross, all that kind of jump rope stuff, and you'll be solid.
Exactly. And the caveat of the accountant invitation is during the acceptance of the invitation, you have to associate what firm to attach it to. So there is that added step during that invitation process. We have a little bonus for you. We did a workshop over at School of Bookkeeping about accepting international accountant invitations. So being able to use one login for both Canada and US clients or global clients. You can check that out there. All right. So the changing primary admin, this is the easy method. This is when the primary admin is available and cooperative, right? The primary admin logs in, they find a company admin available to choose them. And then that company admin has to accept the role, right? So they get an email, they have to accept that and log in order to complete the process. Just transferring it doesn't mean that it's done and over with. So there's a link for that.
Real quickly on that part. So this is one of the areas where as an accountant, when we want to be removed from a company file that we shouldn't have connection to, you can go in and you can say delete, and it will actually try to push and make them become the primary administrator again. But if they don't accept it, it doesn't happen. So that is one thing to keep an eye on, right?
Yeah, it's like a relay race, right? Like to pass the baton, they have to take that baton in order to continue running. If they just drop the baton, they're disqualified. So here's the difficult scenario, and this is typically where we get in this situation where the primary admin's either not responsive, cooperating, or alive. This unfortunately happens where you no longer have access to that login to be able to sign in. This is going to be a legal process called the requesting to be the primary admin. This gets the accounting community is very, trying to think of words, intimate with this because clients come and go. You create the subscription, as we mentioned as a scenario before, you're the primary admin and the accountant no longer working together. The accountant or the business owns their business, right? They want their business. They have to then claim proof of identity, proof of the company, and it's a legal process. And there's all sorts of scenarios where that should be the case, and there's all sorts of scenarios where that shouldn't be the case. But if you do need to go through this process, it is a legal process, and they have to give prescribed amount of time for that person to respond. And if they're in that third category, if they're not live, that's going to take them time because, of course, that timing is going to pass before they can go on to the next step. There's a link there for that whole process, but it can be quite challenging when the login doesn't, or the person who is the primary admin is not available. Email change, right? If you are changing email, I saw somebody talking about this is perfect because I just changed my email. If you are where you change your email is paramount, is important. If it's your login, you do that at accounts.intuit.com because that is only dealing with your login, not any persona that might be associated with that login. If you're changing the email, you log in to accounts.intuit.com and then you change that email there and go through the verification process to the new email and you're done, right? If it's a persona, we're talking about camp, we're talking about any particular site or service that you're changing the email to, you do that in the service. But keep in mind, those are separate now. So if you change it in the persona on the service, don't expect it to change in your login, right? So they're completely separate. And then if you don't have access to that old email, it gets further complicated. And then you have to do an email change request form to recover your account. And there's a link there for the article there. And I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. I want to make sure I cover everything that we wanted to cover today. So best practice. Don't share your login. That's one of the key things there. Because your login is unique to you, keep it that way. Don't do a shared login, but to Matthew's point, if you have a email address associated with a login that is available and accessible by the people that should have access to it, that's a good practice for when things go south. Use MFA. Always make sure that you set up the multi-factor authentication in a phone number or a shared way that people can access that. I know that there's all sorts of tips and tricks around that. And then instead of using incognito mode, create a Chrome profile for various logins. Because of going into incognito mode when you're accepting an invitation, there might be something that is interfering or that you want to have happen or that is cleared out by going into incognito mode. It may work, it may certainly work, but it's far better to set up a Chrome profile, a fresh snow of Chrome profiles to be able to log into different logins if you have that set up. And then this is a little more advanced, but I wanted to mention it that with Google or Workspace and most web-based email, you can separate the login. I'm sorry, you can separate the email address to if you need something that is unique, but you want to share the same email, right? In this example, I put in Michelle +1 at Long for Success. If that is a Gmail address or a Google Workspace account, it will totally work. It's a unique login name, or not a long name. We got sidetracked by the Michelle Long. It's a unique login name, but it auto forwards to your main email address, right? So you can have +1, +2, +3, plus however many numbers you want, and it will all go back to the main email address. And it doesn't have to be numbers. It could be purpose, right? Like you could have Michelle plus banking at Long for Success, so that you have a unique login there, but those contact emails automatically back to the main email address. So it's a unique thing to work with. If you need to have set up a unique login, but you don't want to use another email. So last polling question, as we're coming in for a landing, where'd it go? Oh, I lost my poll. Where did they go? I see them. They're right there. Okay. Oh, I had the sharing of the last one to the last one. Where did they help? All right. Michelle, Matthew, Linda, any closing thoughts about login shenanigans?
I love that email trick that you just shared about the +1 or the plus banking. I did not know that, so I think that's great. So thank you. And I now have a better understanding of why when I change something in like state champs, for example, where it doesn't change everywhere, because that used to drive me crazy. I'd be like, wait a minute, I thought I changed this. I know I changed that. And then it's not changed. And so I have a better understanding of why that is the case. So that helps as well to have better understanding. So you did shed some light on some of the mystery of why things don't work the way I would expect them to work. So that helped a lot to clarify and understand some things. And I see other people here saying, great topic, and agree. Thank you as always. You got great info there, Dan.
All right, Matthew.
Linda, what'd you learn?
Wasn't here for the whole thing. Now I want to go back to what was I always didn't go to it. I never tried incognito, and it never worked in Chrome. I always went to Safari just to accept an invitation. It works for me. I don't know if that's an easier way than sending enough to log out and go through all the MFA again. I could just pop back into my file. But no, this is great. I never really understood camps. It was always such a weird thing back even in the desktop day. I had many identity. So I was like, which identity am I under? And other client names are getting messed up. So this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, if there's one thing I can help everybody take away from, at least from my experiences, again, at the accountant level, even the business level, is set up your primary person under a different email address. And then you have your different business partners as accountants underneath it, because you never know what's going to happen, how change occurs. And it makes it so much easier if somebody leaves. You don't have to try to fix half of a company or a third or whatever it would be. So thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Right. So we'll see, Matthew, we'll see you and Linda at Intuit Connect next week, and Michelle and Joy not going.
Not going. I can't wait to hear all about it though. I'm sure it's going to be some good stuff.
One more. Yep. If you guys see us there, come up, say hello. The whole point is to let you guys know what's changing this year. So thank you again for the invite to join you all here on QB Power Hour.
We'll see you next time on the Power Hour.
Thanks,
Hope
everybody.
has a great day.
We hope you enjoyed listening to the QB Power Hour podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in our Facebook group. You can find those resources and much more at qbpowerhour.com.